Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining me in the esoteric darkness once again. Today I wanted to start out with painting you a picture. I do this from time to time, and if this is your first time here, welcome. And if you're returning, welcome. And I'm going to give you something a bit different today. Today, I wanted to discuss something that I came across in a way similar to how Lovecraft describes coming across things. It's something mundane that you come across, something that wouldn't matter to 99% of people, but you just get your mind stuck on it. It's something that won't leave your head. And let me paint you a picture. This isn't necessarily how it happened. This is me romanticizing how it happened to give you a better feel of how it felt to me. So, before we start, please like, comment, and subscribe. You already know the business. Hit the 4 buttons. Really helps me out in the algorithm. Really boosts my numbers. Tiny Froge can only take me so far. It's up to you guys to do the rest, and I appreciate every single person who dedicates their time to this video. I read all my comments, and if that's not enough, well, just watch the rest of the video. I put a lot of work into these things, and it means a lot that you consume them. So, as for the story, let's start on a very cold, rainy night. You're walking home from college. This is pre the era we all live in now, you know. Think 2015 or so. This is think 2019 right before everything went down the drain. It's a cold, rainy night. You're walking home from college or wherever you're learning, and you decide that you don't have enough books at home. You know, today would be a really cozy day to sit by the fire and read a book. But you've read through all your good books. So you figure I'll just pop into the local used bookstore, try and find something. But before you can make it there, you find a little bookstore you've never seen before. One that seems to be in a back alley behind the bar, only's got a little sign out front pointing people towards it. Your curiosity is piqued. It's no different from any normal bookstore, it looks like. But something you feel sets it apart. And of course, the storekeeper greets you with the typical, "Anything I can help you with?" You're a little unsure. You're looking through all of the used books, and all of it is just boring. All things you've read before, all the solid classics, people's returned copies of many religious texts, many fiction books you've already read through or have heard good things about but never really caught your eye. Those young adult fiction books you're a little too old for, but you don't want to jump into any of the bigger adult books yet. That's not your style. You want something weird, and you don't see any weird. It's all safe. You know, you look at this book, How the Irish Saved the World. That might be interesting to someone who's Irish, but that's not interesting to me. Atlas Shrugged. That's like 1,000 pages, and it's got a 60-page chapter where Ayn Rand takes the fiction out of philosophy and fiction and just talks about philosophy for 60 pages, and it's really annoying. Don't want to sit through that again. So you ask the shopkeeper, do you have anything different? Do you have anything special? Do you have anything that might pique my interest? And the shopkeeper smiles, almost anticipating you'd ask this question, but never knowing when. And when you ask this question, you get a response that's slow and calculating. He says, "Come to the back. I might have just what you're looking for." Now, you don't know what you're looking for, but you have a feeling that he knows what you're looking for. As he takes you behind the black curtain, through a door, past where the bathroom is. It's a dark, dingy room. Very dry, but it feels like it should be a moist, desiccated room. On this table sits a pile of well-stylized books. You can't really put your finger on it. It's a unique art style, but you feel that you've seen it before. It's unique, but it still gives you that feeling. You've never seen anything like it, but it feels so familiar. And these books are labeled things odd, but almost enchanting. The Golden Thread, Imperium, The Man of Genius. All of these titles catch your eye. You can't pick just one. You'll have to have them all. And of course, these come at not used bookstore prices. He's not trying to gouge you, even though you've never seen these books before. He charges you the shelf price, almost as if he wants you to take them off his hands. And this unnerves you a little. You feel like you should be getting price gouged. You know, that normal bookstore has their copy of Livy for like $600, or, you know, Intro to Magic for $150. You're making out with this entire bibliography for only about $300. But as you leave, covering these books with your coat in lieu of yourself, you don't know what's inside them. You never bothered to look. You got them based on the cover alone and vague hints at what their titles might imply. And as you get home and you start flipping through the pages, you realize you might have discovered something that you weren't looking for. One or two of these you might have been able to expect. You know, proof of a conspiracy against all the religions and governments of Europe carried in on the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading, and so on. That one you can kind of clock. But some of them just have one-word titles, like Blood and Right, written by authors who aren't necessarily gone from the scene yet. These aren't as old as you thought they were, but they feel like they're from a bygone time. And as you read them, it feels like all of their ideas are from a bygone time too. And then you can't find the bookstore again, or something. There's the Lovecraftian twist. You try and find it again, and you can never find the bookstore, and the guy was actually fake the whole time, but you still have the books, and whenever you try and tell someone how you got the books, you're crazy. But I actually got these books in a similar way. Although I actually kind of went searching for them because I saw a video on one of the crazy guys and I was like, I could do a video on that guy. And then I looked at what books he's written and I was like, oh, I gotta have the one with the best cover, and all the reprints have terrible covers. What about this hardcover one from 2013? And apparently it's the most rarest impossible one to find if you're looking in a traditional way. But I'm not going to advocate any way to acquire these. You're going to have to try and find a way to acquire them yourself, because a lot of these are thousands of dollars if you buy these at quote-unquote retail prices, if you count eBay and old Amazon listings as trustworthy sources. I actually tried to buy one from Amazon France, and it was only $100, and I was like, yippee! And I bought it, and I waited for them to ship it, and I said, hey, are you still going to ship my book? And they're like, oh, it must have been lost. We'll just refund you the money. And I said, no, I'd rather have the book! But whatever. Now that my personal connection is out of the way, I did actually find these books through that ramshackle way, but they're all under the same publishing house, and that is what we're looking at today, Wermod and Wermod Publishing. Now, they go by two other names, one of which is more significant and the other of which isn't. There's one called Iron Sky Publishing, which I feel is a reference to a sci-fi novel, because their summaries say that they focus on apocalyptica, and Iron Sky is the name of a sci-fi apocalyptica novel. Wow, how subtle. And the second one is the Palingenesis Project. Now, if that doesn't mean anything to you, I don't blame you, because a lot of these books, when you start listening for some of the cues they give you on what to think, or some of the ways they deliver their ideas, it's not necessarily hard to see what they're going for. But let me start you off easy. Palingenesis is, first of all, a magic card. Second of all, a verb that is derived from Greek, meaning to create new life or continue a cycle of life. Now, you may be able to tell from the magic card because it was used to announce the coming of a child, but I'm going to tell you a second meaning at the end. That is most likely what it means, but once you've been inoculated into the language of this company, it'll be a lot easier to see what they're trying to go to. First of all, this publishing house is defunct. Their website is taken over by an interior design company, and one of their founders, well, the founder, who was also an author of some of the first books that this publishing house published, he's moved on to bigger and better things. And this is where I should put the disclaimer. Some of these people are still alive, although most of them aren't. So I would please ask, don't go harassing them. I know the first person we're going to talk about, the founder, Alex Kurtagic, is very happy just running his lifting and artsy Instagram page. He's completely removed himself from what he's written in the past, and I don't think he deserves to be made fun of for it. I don't endorse harassment of any of these people who have written these things, and I don't think you should seek them out unless you are curious, I suppose. But no harassment. I denounce any harassment that comes from this video. But who is Alex Kurtagic? Well, that is a rabbit hole that led me down this entire project in the first place. Alex Kurtagic was born to a Spanish-Slovene couple, spent a lot of his time in South America, and he wasn't always into the book scene. In fact, he started in the metal scene. He's still very into music. If you would like his curated selection of bands, I believe he will still give it to you, but don't quote me on that. Although his Instagram page is still active, so be civil if you wish to contact him. It seems that during some point in his youth to his teenage years, he moved moved to Britain, or the UK, whichever you want to call it nowadays. And from there, he became involved in a certain, how do I say it, angle of politics. He's always been very into art, but this political angle gave him a little more popularity. He became known as a alternative right-wing speaker, and with his first book, writer as well. Something that I will congratulate him on is all of Wermod and Wermod's books have art done by Alex Kurtagic, and it is, like I said, distinctly unique, but it feels as if I've seen it before. Not in a bad way, but in a way that says it's familiar. It's a very familiar, unique art style, and even the photography on his Instagram conveys this. He's a very stylistic person, and I appreciate it. Like all alt-right thinkers, he made a collection of articles and essays that was, of course, published in English and German, and more recently he also published a second novel called Angel. I might read it if time allows, but he also made an art compilation. I believe most of his recent publishings are not under Wermod and Wermod, Iron Sky, or Palingenesis. I believe they're under Spatabach Publishing now, which I'm not going to go into. I don't know their jib. I prefer going over the autopsies of things that have been long since past. But why this publishing company? Well, if me mentioning politics did not tip you off, it's a conflicted body we are looking at today, referring to Wermod and Wermod. It's very conflicted, because you'll see some names you recognize, such as Lovecraft or Rembrandt, and then a lot of other esoteric names you would not even recognize even if you knew the political sphere. Just as a little bit of a spoiler, I'm surprised there was never any of the writings of George Sorel. I would have been very surprised to see his writings reprinted by Wermod and Wermod. It would have been very on brand. But I want to cover the authors. All of these could be videos in their own, but I like to say my channel covers kooks and kook-adjacent things. And I would say all of these authors are kooks to some degree. Not in the sense of they're crazy, but in the sense of they push the limits of human belief. Like Donna Cosey's book, which heavily inspired this YouTube channel, says, kooks is the extent of human belief and what people believe. And I feel sad that I haven't found the far left equivalent of Wermod and Wermod yet. Although, if you have any recommendations, please put them down below. I like extremes, not necessarily what those extremes entail, mainly because it's fun to see what people will come up with when given the array of scattermarked data points that is life. But I want to start with a slight overview of Francis Parker Yockey, the author that got me into this whole mess. Now, Yockey's life is a bit of a mystery in and of itself. Not that we don't know a lot about him, but because his beliefs changed a lot throughout his life. Mainly because he was a journalist for most of his life. And he covered the Nuremberg trials, which you may think would have galvanized him in, the fascists are bad category, but in fact he took the reverse and did not necessarily become one, but became more of a sympathetic. He traveled all around the world trying to spread his ideas, but the book Imperium, The Philosophy of History and Politics, was written in very strange conditions. It was written over a 2-year span, and this 2 years was spent in Ireland, in a shack on an island all alone, where he took no notes and wrote around 700 pages of history and politics, obviously. Now, what does this book entail? If you believe the Hoi 4 mods, it is a union of Europe and North America to save the great dying superculture of the West. Did I mention that this is a sequel to Oswald Spengler? If you don't know, Oswald Spengler is the original Chudjack, not in the sense where he says nothing ever happens, but in the sense of he says the West is falling, that one? He wrote a book called The Decline of the West, and in the beginning of Imperium it says, this is a follow-up to Spengler's work, so if you're going to read this, you gotta read Spengler first. But if you followed that logic, you would have to start all the way back at Plato and work your way back up, and by the time you even began to reach, Enlightenment era thinking, you'd already be gone a while ago, in fact turned to ash, and then your gravestone would have already begun the process of decay. Another book also published by Wermod and Wermod by this author is The Proclamation of London, effectively what lies out Yockey's manifesto of sorts, lies out what he believes and why. Really no more than that. I would say read the books for yourself, but also you have to go into it with the mental hazmat suit on. You need to say, I am consuming these as me trying to pick out the good ideas from ideas I might not normally agree with. And that's hard. It's mentally draining. All of these books are very hard to get through if you take that lens. Anyway, what happened to Yaki anyway? Now this is a funny story, because Yaki, for some reason, whether this be planting or some other reason, as he was trying to return to the United States, as he was a citizen of the United States, going through customs, he dropped all of his fake IDs that he just kept around with names of, people who aren't him, but his picture in the way, and he got arrested and then expired in prison under mysterious circumstances. Think about it as, I don't want to say, the island case, but people expiring mysteriously in prison always raises an eyebrow, and the intro in the Noontide Press version of the book, the one that I had to get before I could find the nice hardcover, because I actually just wanted to read the book at that point and I was going to settle for anything, basically says this guy was targeted by people and it can happen to you, it can happen to any of us, and it's a little more dire. Honestly, the intro was the most engaging part of that book because it kind of lost all the fire. You can really get the dry political angle from it. But not all of these people are strangers to things that might be published by this company. I mean, you also have Lovecraft. Not one of his short stories that he's known for, but one of his, I don't want to say educational writings, but one that provides a lot of angles, I suppose. It's called Supernatural Horror in Literature, where he explains his writing process and how he comes up with the ideas that he does, and what is important when writing literature like his, if you're a student of that. Now, if we're going with a boiling the frog analogy, we've effectively turned up the temperature a tiny bit. It's nothing that you can't handle, but I'm going to turn it up a little more. Possibly not so much that you'll jump out, but where you'll effectively get an idea as to where this is going. I want to start off with a novel called Where Black Rules White by Hasketh Pritchard. First of all, he was English, and second of all, he was a hunter. He was a sniper during the First World War, and he's not someone you may consider a political figure, but someone who was immersed deep in British colonialism, which is what the book mainly covers. It covers his exploration of Haiti. Now, this was a time when Haiti was, I don't want to say not the best place to live, but it is definitely a freshly post-colonial Haiti. And this influences Pritchard, being knee-deep in colonialism and documenting the culture of people who have just thrown out their colonial masters. It provides a unique angle that might not resonate very well with today's audiences, especially when he begins going into the mountains and jungles, and it gets more into the bushwhacky, do-it-yourself type traditional masculinity angle. It may be valuable to some people. All of these books have something valuable in them if you're willing to pick through all of the things that aren't valuable, and that's for you to decide. I'm not going to tell you what's valuable and not valuable, but I'm telling you there's something valuable in all of these books. But that's a little more understandable, far divorced from our time. So turning up the temperature a little more, I want to move on to another ancient thinker, someone called John Robison. Now, there are a lot of John Robisons in history, but this one happened to be a physicist. Remember how I mentioned those Enlightenment era ideas earlier? He wrote a book titled with a very long name, which is, in full, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati, and reading societies. Now, it's exactly what it says on the tin. This is your classic, before we got all of these birds aren't real ones. I know that's super old now. Birds aren't real and chemtrails. We had all of the pre-primordial conspiracies. It's these secret societies, the Templars, the Freemasons, the Illuminati, and reading societies. They're all reading books and teaching themselves how to overthrow the government and becoming atheists. And all of these just started as secret societies. Our modern culture has blown up the Illuminati to be way more than it was originally intended. Freemasons, too. Not defending either of those groups. I mean, they're still secret societies, and I'm not members of them. But fun fact, I did try and join the Freemasons, but I really didn't jive with their message because I kind of wanted to join for the slightly esoteric conspiracy angle, but they basically make you sign a form at the beginning that says, this is not a conspiracy organization. We're just a big old boys club that does charity and eats a bunch of stuff and does some cool rituals in a room. It's religion without religion, although you have to believe in a higher power to join, so well, not my circus, not my monkeys. But in this book, he effectively says what it says on the tin. I really wouldn't write off this man's intelligence just because of what he wrote. This is another one you could really chalk up to the times he was in. I mean, if the prime of your life is like 1762, you're gonna have some pretty out there ideas when it comes to modern ideas and modern angles on those things. You know, he lectured on all these things that are going to become super influential, you know, like optics, astronomy, magnetism, all of these things that are going to be super important in the 20th century. Traveled all around the world, taught everywhere. I don't think you should write him off just because of one book he wrote with 17th century knowledge, when these groups were already starting to get their tendrils and get their feet into conspiracy territory. We'll keep the heat where it is. We'll let you get used to the temperature. The next one I want to cover is a book called The Man of Genius. This one is written by Cesare Lombroso. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. He is Italian. But he, as you may not know, is the father of criminology. He's a physician and a lot of other things that were kind of acceptable at the time. You know, you may go to a doctor's appointment and they may say, you know, I'm going to tap your leg to test your reflexes, and then they hit your knee and you kick and you're like, wow, what was the point of that? This seems like kind of pseudoscience to me. Why do my reflexes matter? Why is that important? Why are my pupils important, officer? I'm just fine. But he kind of gets into weird territory, where it's product of his time weird territory, but still, it's not something I'd recommend you bring into your next criminology class where you say, we can predict criminals by the skull bumps on their head, or we can breed criminals out of people if we just sterilize all of the criminals, which is a weird thing to say. He definitely was into phrenology, which, if you don't know, is, like I mentioned before, the study of bumps on the skull and what those bumps may say a person is predisposed to. You know, it's like that test they give you in school where they say, where's your aptitude at? And they, you know, gauge you on your knowledge in certain types of things, and they say, you may be a good electrician, or you might want to pursue dance lessons. But what if some guy came into your classroom and he's just like, okay, he's like the Santa Claus looking guy comes in and he's like, okay, sit on my lap, and he massages your skull for a couple minutes and he says, you would be a good nurse. You're predisposed to be a doctor. You're predisposed to be a lawyer. And then after all of that is done, he just leaves. It's all done. I recommend you be sterilized right now. But the book he dedicated to Wermod and Wermod, as previously mentioned, is The Man of Genius. Now, this book is a little interesting, as The Man of Genius really lives up to the saying, genius and insanity are a fine line. You can either be a genius or you can be insane. I hope that's what you see in me, walking the fine line between genius and insanity. And as he was a eugenicist, he says people are predisposed to these things, and how do you manage these things? It's a purely scientific book with some philosophy in between. It's psychology, people predisposed to certain things, setting the stage for, I don't want to say modern psychology, but in a weird way kind of advocates for mental health rights in a time before the rights of the mentally ill were even considered to be more than just lock them in an asylum and forget about them until they rot away. It's a weird book, and it has me conflicted on a lot of things, but it's definitely a good read if you're going into criminology or something along those lines. Keeping the temperature the same, just want you to get adjusted because we're still in the product of their time kind of group. We have Rembrandt as an Educator by Langblin Julius, or Julius Langblin. Now, with the way this video is headed, when I say he was a German national romantic art historian and philosopher born in Schleswig, you may get some different ideas. But when I say 1851, you should breathe a sigh of relief. He was born in a time when German nationalism was on the rise, and luckily would not see the horrors of the Great War. But at its time, his first book that he published, Rembrandt as an Educator, as we previously mentioned, it was a huge success. But there's a dark side to this. Rembrandt as an Educator, at its base, it's an interesting book. Think of it as revolt against the modern world, but as a product of its time, basically bashing modernity at every single turn, never giving it a break. And he lifted up Rembrandt as, how do I say this nicely, a model example of his nationality. As, remember, like I said, he, during this time, is watching the emergence of Germany, and the two uniting prime cultures, as noted in Victoria 2, are South German and North German. He attributes Rembrandt to the South German group. And you might say, an educator in what sense? And it's not in art, as you would suppose. It's not a book about artistic theory. It's a book about the culture he was brought up in, that German nationalism, and how a South German confederation could lead primacy over the North. This would not be the case, as Bavaria would be absorbed by Prussia, effectively. So, guess that's consigned to Victoria II territory. But this book wouldn't have been harmful or frankly noteworthy if it hadn't gone through dozens and dozens of iterations where he increasingly added more attachments or additions to the book that just bash a certain group of people that you can probably guess by me mentioning fascism earlier. A very kosher-bosher group of people. Sorry for the roundabout way of saying it. I just don't know YouTube's opinions on me saying just flat out it's the... Thank you, Censored Lobotomy Corp. I really needed you there. There was no other way out of there. Now, go back to your containment unit. I guess I'll have to continue in this alternate dimension recording until I can find a way to put myself back together in the prime dimension. Anyway, this edition struggle was written and rewritten 39 times, which, in my opinion, really only rivals the Science and Health for the amount of times that you can redo a book and still have people read it. But once again, product of his time. This isn't the German Empire is established and needs to be more revanchist and take back all its land that was taken from it. It is merely prostrating how Germany will be formed, saying the South Germans should take notes from Rembrandt as an educator and lead themselves to primacy over Prussia, which would not come to pass. Let's turn up the heat a little more. Still product of his time, but getting a little more into the generalistic overtones that Wermod and Wermod seems to embody. The next book is a little more blatantly titled, called The Passing of the Great Race. This one is published by the Palingenesis Project. Put that one on the board. All 4 of the books published by the Palingenesis Project have a theme, and I'll get to it. I just have to save it until I get to that point. But The Passing of the Great Race was written by Madison Grant. Madison Grant was also a eugenicist. Where have we heard that one before? Except instead of being a father of psychology, he was a lawyer, zoologist, conservationist, and white supremacist eugenicist. You ever heard the term scientific racism? No matter how much you ascribe to that term, nowadays, in case you don't know, that means saying certain races are inferior to others based on certain pre-generated characteristics based on genetics. No matter your opinion, whether that is real or complete hogwash, I personally think it's complete hogwash, but regardless of how you view it, that's what this guy thought. He was a big fan of the, classic Nordic aliens. All the aliens are Nordic. They're coming from Hyperborea. Well, not that far, but... When you get a title like John the Baptist of H-Man, big guy who led Germany in the 1930s and 40s, you're not really painting a good image for yourself in that way. Oh, the music stopped. Hold on. You're not really painting a good image for yourself. And he would write a book, which its full title is The Passing of the Great Race, or the racial basis of European history, which nowadays, looking back at it, you can say is a complete aberration of a book, frankly. It goes to the same thing that Lombroso said. You know, certain genetic peoples are predisposed to criminal syndicates and ethnic lobbying groups and political machines. And all of these stocks of certain peoples need to continue with themselves and exclude other reasons. And the United States has always been a Nordic country. And it's a weird book, especially if... I'm not even going to attempt that. You can get a lot of things out of this book if you're more... I don't want to say predisposed to white supremacy, but... If you're a sane, normal human being, I would stick to the second section of the book for anything good you could derive out of it. It takes a more racialist view of history, which at its time was a well-tread thing. Something that was not necessarily accepted, but also not denied. But this one is very, very likely the one that you can... Honestly, from this book forward, you can probably start just saying that a lot of these are going to be pseudoscientific, esoteric dogma. That if you are going into it with your mental hazmat suit on, you're going to get very tired very fast, because it is a lot of dogma where you have to know the language they're talking about, you have to know what each term means, and sometimes it's a product of their time. You know, this is a really when, you know, you got the dictator of Germany in the 1930s saying, oh, this is my Bible, like, what are you gonna do? Like, what do you want me to say about this? Why would you republish this? Well, it was published in 1916, which means it was published by Wermod and Wermod almost 100 years after its original publication. But this is what you get when you go to the used Lovecraftian bookshop and you ask for something different. Because I don't think I've heard anyone talk about any of these things. And that's probably for a good reason. So, if you made it this far, this is a message to you and the message to the future. Just remember, this is the time you should treasure, because this is when I can say what I want. If I ever get to the point where I'm big enough to start making business decisions, I don't even think I'll ever get there. I really do just enjoy the really tiny, I can say whatever I want type style channel, but I know if I keep doing it for any length of time, that's gonna change at some point. You can see this in a bunch of other channels too. Namely, I saw it in Zoomer Historian. You see, you know, the most radical, you can say whatever you want when you're small, but the second you start getting bigger, you have to gentrify and control your language, and it's just something that I've never enjoyed, but I know that I'm going to have to do, so I'm kind of starting on it already. Just let this be a message to the future, that if you ever feel like I've gone soft, it's a choice that I made with both of my hands tied behind my back. I want to remain esoteric. I want to remain speaking how I do, but that's just going to be impossible at some point, especially if I want to risk my channel staying up. Well, if I don't want to risk my channel being taken down, I'm going to have to gentrify my language. I'm going to have to bend the knee. And I think it's worth it just to get these crazy people out to you, because I want to explore the extents of human belief, and the extents of human belief are not usually nice. They're not applicable to the dinner table. So I just wanted to let you know that if I ever go soft, it's a choice that I made somewhat unwillingly. But anyway, where was I in this set of esoteric books that could possibly get me taken off of this platform with a nuclear weapon? Let's turn up the heat a little more. The next book, also written by the also published by the Palingenesis Project, is Aryan Worldview. Now, this is kind of where you've been boiled. Joke's on you, Frog. You've been boiled. This is where we actually get to the point where it's going to start talking about fascism. And, well, we'd already kind of been there, but racist thought as a whole. I do want to cover something in the future that is kind of related to that, but it's more in a silly, goofy way. And I know it's kind of weird to say racism can be silly, goofy, but it's not, because it's racism. It's taking a racist idea and then making it an a-racist idea. It's weird. I got to do it sometime. But once again, This book is written by Houston Stewart Chamberlain. Once again, like our previous entry, he was into the natural sciences, political philosophy, anti-Semitism, scientific racism, Nords are the superior race, ethno-nationalism, and he's another one of these people that influenced 1930s Germany. And he moved to Germany purely out of his love for Richard Wagner. So much so that he married Wagner's daughter. He also LARPed so hard into the whole German angle that he fought against Britain in the First World War and took German citizenship because of it. He also got a lot of his views in French-speaking Switzerland in the University of Geneva, aka, if you didn't know, Switzerland's capital. Now, remember, product of his time, he was someone you would consider a liberal, and then got into the Vril LARP. Although he didn't call it Vril, he called it the theory of vital force, which is something described in the book, and it's a guy explaining racial theories. Because, it starts off in the most stuck-up, pompous way possible. He says, the layman is an expert on layman's affairs, so I must be an expert on Aryan affairs. And he basically progenites the word Aryan as we know it today, even though he says, I'd probably like Indo-Aryan, but that doesn't fit on the cover very well. And he says, we shouldn't be debating these things. And he goes on to explain, if you know fascist dogma, it's exactly the thing you're thinking of. Why they're the superior race, why they deserve to conquer the world, why a bunch of fascist rats went to Tibet and discovered a bunch of things and tried anti-gravity tech and all that weird stuff. It's just in 1905 type things, still out there for his time, but you can kind of understand where he's coming from. Once again, just another book you can really, really draining to get through if you are not this guy's onto something. He's not. But it does, a lot of these are just pushing the extent of human belief. What did people believe? Why did this fall out of style? How does this apply to the modern culture? Even though that's getting less and less applicable as this goes on and on. It gets worse. It keeps getting worse. I want it to, please let it stop. How many do we have left? Okay. Who do I choose? I'm gonna pick the modern guy, because the guy in the modern day is a little less extreme than the guy who bit the bullet in 2009. A lot of these books, namely Blood and Right and Axe, all these one-word books, are written by a man named Jonathan Bowden. Now, this is one of the people... The article was written like he was still extant. He is not, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on where you lie on the political spectrum. He was born in 1962. A lot more present than all these people who were in the 1900s, 1930s, 1730. Jonathan Bowden, pretty normal British politician. Self-educated, went into the Conservatives, really took it in another direction, joining the BMP, founding the New Right, or as we'd call it today, alt-right, or whatever the term is nowadays. I grew up with alt-right. Appeared with Richard Spencer on the Vanguard. Full-blown not living in reality type deal. But, it's another one of those weird, he had a heart attack and in his house and no one knows why. Ooh. He was going to the psychiatric hospital. It might have been anxiety. Who knows? But what does he write? A lot of his books are almost exactly what they say on the tin. Right is written about, might and what right means. And Axe is written about the day of the axe. And Blood is obviously what you'd think about these cultural vampires. And he's a little more applicable if you're in those spheres. He's not like Siege, but he's a little more applicable to the modern culture. But be careful to put your hazmat suit on. These are short, but genuinely different. This is the best way to put it. Now, what makes him not the last person on the list? Because the last person on the list, the one at the very bottom of the pile, the one that your book dealer probably didn't want to tell you, the one that he kind of just lumped in with everything else because, Rembrandt as an educator doesn't look too bad. But, when you start piling down and you're like, oh, Imperium, that one's weird, or, oh, the conspiracies of the Freemasons and the Illuminati or whatever, you gotta boil the frog, and this is where you boil. This one I'm simply going to refer to as the Golden Thread because its full title is, frankly, unsuitable for this platform. And another thing is I'm going to re-bring up Alex Kurtagic's book, Mr., because the tagline, I'm just going to call it esoteric fascism, because that might actually not get me destroyed. But esoteric fascism is kind of just randomly blown in there because Mr. is a book where, it's your classic racist guy walks through Spain on a business trip. He's like, wow, look at all these brown people that I'm surrounded by. Isn't that so gross? But it kind of has the Dante's Inferno vibe where sometimes he'll just go meet random people like Jonathan Bowden and it's like, oh wow, Jonathan Bowden, I love you. And then he talks to him for a bit and leaves. And then he runs into this esoteric fascist society. I did a double take because I was reading through the plot summary on Amazon. You're reading through the summary on Amazon, right? And you're like, oh, a status-conscious IT consultant travels to Madrid for a week of meetings, who have hired him for an arcane accounting system equipped with artificial intelligence as an effort to keep the company one step ahead of the government's rapacious tax authorities. Standard big business stuff. Renowned within the catacombs of the scientific community and an impressive publishing record in the most prestigious trade and academic journals, he expects to do serious business with a serious organization. The only problem is that he lives in a hot, overcrowded world where nothing works. Hyperinflation, crumbling infrastructure, rampant crime, political correctness. And that's the point when I raised my eyebrow. And then I said corruption at all levels. And a new world order globalist government determined to regulate, monitor, and tax every aspect of a person's life opposed to the forces of totalitarian democracy. Are an occult underground movements, and that most notably the esoteric fashion, and then it goes off the rails so fast, and you're like, whoa! I raised my eyebrow, and then I just completely stumbled metaphorically and fell down the stairs. It's crazy. But, going back to the author of The Golden Thread, not to get sidetracked, it was written by a Miguel Serrano, born in Chile, was an occultist, fascist, and German sympathizer. And this guy is not oh, he lived in or he probably bit it during the war. No, this was he bit it in 2009. Do you know how recently that was? That was 16 years ago. Oh, that felt bad to say. That was 16 years ago. Probably closer than any of the other guys, well, besides Jonathan Bowden. But this is the guy who fully goes off the rails and really gives you the boiling frog treatment. Basically, every neo-fascist trait you could assign to a person is expressed in this guy. Especially the tying in the Western esotericism to Hinduism, and the manipulation of world events by a certain small group. And he also translated all these other famous books like The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Just completely crazy. Oh, Germany's dictator didn't bite it. He's actually safe on this island where he can... I don't even wanna. And the Golden Thread is just that. It's just him talking about all these things. And it's just the classic esoteric fascist stuff. And you're like, wow, this guy is utterly off the rails bonkers. And you can read it like a comedy novel because none of it reads like actual real human thought. And you gotta think, someone at this point in history believed this. Someone believed this enough to write a 500-page book about this. People will write super long forum posts or, the longest piece of literature in all of human events is a fan fiction or something. That's utterly crazy to me. Insane. And I love it. Not the ideas. I hate the ideas in there. But just the fact that someone would believe such a thing, write it down, and preach it like it's real. That to me is crazy. And that's why I love it. But I promised you a closure on the palingenesis project. Now, palingenesis has another meaning, especially in esoteric fascist circles. It is one of the definitions of true fascism, but that's... Palingenesis is the rebirth of the nation. You know how a lot of candidates are like, we'll make the nation great again. We'll bring it back to that idealized past that never existed. And, well, never existed in the sense of the way we're preaching it. It probably... You're living in the golden past right now. That's the best way I can put it. And when you look back, you'll say, wow, that time was really great. Even though now you're probably thinking, wow, this really sucks. I can't afford to pay anything. Everything's super expensive, whatever. But you're going to look back on it and you're going to say, wow, that was really great because I didn't realize all these things. You're living in the idealized past that someone is going to idealize right now and possibly use to justify things in the future. Palingenesis to fascists is the rebirth of the nation by adopting a fascist government. It is a revolution or a battle or the election of a certain person who will do all this stuff. And it's the goal to create a new future out of the horrible egg that we're in right now, because all non-fascist governments are just eggs for fascism. And also, just so I don't even miss out on this because it's so much of a LARP. Wermod Wermod is a reference to Mr. Alex Kratagic's original book. So it's just immersed in LARP. It's LARP, 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 LARP. Oh, because the publishing company in my book also publishes the books in real life. That's so cool. And my fictional character meets all these people that I probably idealized at one point, but probably don't anymore because he's denounced politics and does a lifting blog on Instagram. I guess follow Alex Kratagik. I can't even promote my own social media because I don't have one, so I guess go follow Alex Kratagik instead. But that's the autopsy of Wermod Wermod. It is purely LARP, so heavily immersed in LARP, born of LARP, expired in LARP. Palingenesis having its deeper meaning, having all those weird esoteric books about esoteric fascism, talking, Wermod Wermod publishing the more light, quote-unquote, versions, and it's just something that I was interested in. Not necessarily because I agreed with the ideas. I most definitely don't agree with the ideas, but it was the curiosity of trying to find that one book, right? You always find your greatest rabbit holes on things you would never imagine that you were going to find them on. I even still catch myself when going to find books and such. I'll tell myself, just settle for the cover. You don't have to spend $500 billion just to acquire one specific cover of a specific book that someone spit out in like the early 1800s or something. But if I had to boil it down to a meme, it's just the water boiling off to steam in the kettle on the stove, just boiling it down to the one thing at the bottom. It's the meme of when people tell you to read banned books, they mean things like the Handmaid's Tale and not like Wermod Wermod books. Even though I don't think any of these are banned, although I wouldn't be surprised if someone went and said, hey, a lot of these books are actually banned in a lot of different countries. And I would say that's totally believable, because a lot of these are frankly, patently insane. Explore the extent of human belief on all sides of the political spectrum. I mean, if you believe in horseshoe theory. But anyway, I'm not a political channel at heart. I just happen to stumble into political things exploring the extent of human belief. Just a little update on that Francis E. Deck video. It's probably going to be about an hour and a half to 2 hours long. I don't like it, but that's probably how it's going to end up. Just going through the appeal brief alone is exhausting me mentally and physically. It is quite a journey. I'm going to try and power through it, get it recorded on my days off, and then edit that monster, probably get it out in a week or two. So I know a lot of you are here for Francis E. Deck, and I apologize for not making more Francis E. Deck content. I am in the works. I'm working on it. I will compile it into one big massive video, but while I'm on the personal angle, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you made it this far, you must obviously like me talking about weird things. The extent of human belief is something I love to explore on this channel, and that's really what it is. If I could boil it down to a single sentence, it would be exploring the extent of human belief. I was heavily inspired by Autopsy and the Kooks book that I got as a high school graduation present. It really meant a lot because my uncle is the exact type of esoteric weirdo who would buy it for me. And I really took it to heart. I love crazy people, whether they're political or not, no matter what they believe, no matter if they think society should be entirely collectivized through a collective brain structure and we should all work like communist robots, to, my favorite guy in history never died because he actually went to an island somewhere in a submarine, and Hinduism and paganism through a European lens are completely compatible if you just read my book. Or just, I'm getting radio signals through my teeth and birds aren't real and there are bees in my teeth. I love those. I love that type of stuff. I'm that type of person who can walk up to a crackhead and just instantly bond with them because I know what they're talking about. But anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for going through this autopsy of an esoteric book company with me. One that went down the drain a while ago and now all of their books cost over $1,000. Haha, bleh! See you next time.